At this point, we're all kind of well aware of the overheating issues with the Canon R5 and R6. The overheating issues have been in all the reviews, all the early access to the camera. People have been talking about the overheating on the R5 and R6 nonstop, myself included, because I think it's kind of silly, funny, tragic, horrific, whatever adjective you want to throw in there. It's a disaster for Canon and for people who want to use these cameras for their intended purpose, to shoot amazing video and photography as well. These cameras should be everything you would ever want and hope for in a camera based on the specs, but they are plagued with overheating issues. And I know it's beating a dead horse at this point, but the thing is, up until this point, most people have been just talking about these issues existing and being part of the cameras. They overheat, but really not explaining why they overheat. It's been kind of chalked up to, well, they're really powerful cameras, they're doing a lot of amazing things, so they just get too hot, and so obviously they have to put software timers in there to make sure that the camera doesn't melt. That's been the kind of running theory, at least, but it's only recently that people have started to take these cameras apart and kind of play around with what's happening internally based on the temperature checks, how the camera is functioning, is it actually getting too hot, and what's the deal with the recovery state of the camera, because that's one thing, it might overheat, but then why does it take so long to recover? Now we're finally starting to get the information as to like why these things may be in place, and it's looking worse and worse for Canon as we discover everything that's kind of wrong with the R5 and likely the R6 for that matter. Let's pop over to EOS HD and let's look at his recent article where he talks about testing the R5, and based on his tests, he thinks it's a fake timer, basically a software mechanism put in place to restrict your ability to use the camera. It has nothing to do with the actual dangers of the camera getting too hot, and the recovery times also seem to be kind of fabricated. So let's look at this. This is Andrew Reed over at EOS HD, and he says, in this test, we will probe his Canon R5's actual internal temperature in Celsius, as reported by the firmware. He does it in Celsius. I'll try and translate to Fahrenheit, just so we have kind of a little bit of a temperature for everybody. So he wants to know, is the overheating real or fake? So he's working with a kind of software partner, and they've tapped into the Canon API where they're basically communicating with the camera. This isn't a hack. This is the actual API that Canon has released. So totally legit, getting actual data from the camera. He goes on to explain that the camera doesn't give necessarily exact temperature readings over the API. It just does these kind of checksums as like normal, and everything's working well. But it's stored in the JPEG EXIF data that the temperature, the internal temperature, is stored in the JPEG EXIF data, which is kind of interesting. So it's all of that, looking at all that information, compiling it together, and seeing what comes of it. You can read through this because it's very detailed. It goes through the testing process, but I wanted to pick up right here where they're conducting the test indoors. So this isn't, putting out in the sun or anything like that, which other people have tested, and we've all kind of seen that the ambient temperature doesn't really matter, but at least they're doing it indoors. So we observed 30 Celsius, which is 86 Fahrenheit, with the camera switched on from cold for the first time indoors with an ambient temperature of 27 Celsius. Then they observed 46 degrees Celsius after 5 minutes in stills mode with no video recorded and just one photo. So right away, the camera just operating, just being on, bumps up about 16 degrees Celsius, which is significant just for being on. And we'll start talking about that a little bit later. And then they set an intervalometer to take one still every 5 minutes in JPEG, and then the temperature remained at a very steady 46 degrees Celsius. However, after 30 minutes, the video restricted status activated in stills mode with no video recorded whatsoever, and the internal temp still at 76 degrees Celsius. So even though the camera's not actually warming up, it is activating this video restricted status. So the temperature, he says, the temperature didn't increase whatsoever, but the high quality video mode went into lockdown. He goes on to explain some more of this detailed stuff. I highly recommend you read this and check it out in full detail. But basically, he goes on to say that the camera, it's still, kind of only 46 degrees Celsius. It did heat up at one point to around 67 degrees Celsius, but then cooled right back down. And the point being is that even if this is warming up, it should be cooling back down relatively quickly. And in his testing, it shows that it's not the case. The temperature actually, like, even it's not really reading the temperature off of the internal electronic components in the camera. It's basically just saying, no, it overheated. You got to wait, which is what a lot of people are being frustrated with. They're trying basically everything to keep the camera cool. And it doesn't really work that way. It seems more like a timer, some kind of software firmware limitation has been put in place to make sure that you can't use these high-end features that, that's why a big reason a lot of people would want the R5 at least. I can't say that's the only reason people buy the camera. Obviously, you have photographers who just want to take pictures, but there are a lot of people who would like the nice video features on the R5, and it basically just doesn't let you do it. And so his conclusion over on EOS HD is that there are artificial software limits. The overheating problem after a few minutes of 8K does not exist, and nor does it at 46 degrees Celsius. The processor doesn't even have a thermal pad or conductivity internally to ensure longevity and reliability. It's another smoking gun. He finds it unethical. He basically says, as it stands, he believes that Canon is lying to their customers. So I want to talk about this and break it apart because there's some things that you could criticize the testing with. You could say, well, the sensor, the temperature readings might not be from the actual component that's getting too hot. It could be somewhere else in the camera, and so it's registering that it's warm, but somewhere else inside the camera where it's not actually getting the reading from, that's what's really, really hot and dangerously hot. Also, he talks about the levels of what is dangerous for a camera, like how hot can it get? And this would vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, what materials they're using, how the parts are assembled. I don't want to draw any conclusions and say, oh yes, it should be able to operate up to 90 degrees Celsius or whatever, because that's really, really hot. Andrew over on EOS HD says that most computer parts should be fine at that temperature, but I don't even want to go that far. I just want to say there are some things you could pick apart the test, but what's most interesting is the recovery times, being that it doesn't actually matter. He's doing testing, pulling the temperature from the camera as it's taking photos and then reading back to the card with the JPEG files, reading that temperature, and it cools down really, really quick. But yet the camera still says that it's overheating and you have to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait before you can ever record again. This is really interesting considering over on Canon rumors, if we want to head over there, the latest rumor that everybody's got their fingers crossed for is that there may be some kind of R5 firmware update coming soon. And they're maybe going to be adding raw cinema light, like cinema raw light, to the 8K recording, which would reduce those file sizes, which would be a nice thing to have. Addition of C-Log 3, okay, these things have existed, but I guess they could be implemented in the R5. And then it says increased record time limits, but don't expect a huge boost. And then various bug fixes. So what it seems to me that this is signaling is Canon knows there's some kind of problem. Of course, people are clamoring for a firmware update, but really all that they could maybe even implement if the camera is actually overheating. So here's the conclusion. Here's the big takeaway of why this matters and why this is really important. Canon did market this camera based on video features. You can say that it's a photography camera and it shouldn't be able to do these things, and if you believe that, that's totally fine. However, people have pulled the camera apart and they've looked at it and they said Canon did a really bad job doing thermal management for this camera. You could do a lot more with heat sinks and thermal paste, and you could replace a few things, and you would actually have a camera that could do all of these features, and it wouldn't be anywhere near worrying about overheating. If this, the way it's poorly designed, is what's overheating, which based on the testing it's not even, but let's say that it was, the point is that they could have done a better job rearranging a few parts, putting it together a little bit better, and they could have made the camera do everything that they hyped and they said it could do without any problem. So whether it's incompetence, negligence, total malicious behavior because they're protecting their cinema line, it doesn't really matter. The point is that we could have a camera that does this. I mean, the argument has been that, well, Sony with the a7S III, Sony can do it because it's only a 12 megapixel sensor. Canon, it's a 45 megapixel sensor, so it's much harder. That's not true. We're looking at the construction, we're looking at how it's built and how it's designed, and some of these software implementations, restrictions that are there. It's not getting too hot. it is cooling down quickly. They could have done a better job designing it to do the 45 megapixel, 8K RAW, 4K 120, all the great stuff that this camera has. Like, you can shoot the clips, and there's no question. People say the footage is phenomenal. It's the fact that you can't access it hardly at all because you take a couple photos and then all of a sudden that mode, the mode you actually bought the camera for, or the mode you want, is off limits, and now you have to go with the line skipped 4K. And yes, I'm aware of the workarounds of taking the cards out and recording externally, and you can just record forever in 4K HQ. But the point is that the camera can do it. We're not even sure 100% that like it probably could do it already. And we know that it could have been better designed to take into account the heating issues. The great news is, whether Canon fixes it, which at this point, the hardware probably is the hardware unless they do a quick refresh kind of update, like I don't know, a version 2.0 or something like that, the R5 2.0. They could do that. Probably won't do it on the hardware side. Maybe they'll fix some of the firmware where it's more accurate in terms of how it's reading that internal temperature, right? If it's overheating and then you just have to wait an arbitrary period of time for it to cool down, maybe they'll implement something where it's like actually registering the temperature, and they'll say, okay, once it's below, 50 degrees Celsius, you can record again or whatever. Will they do that? Probably. They'll probably implement some firmware thing to open it up a little bit, but I don't expect they'll fully unlock it to where you can just record unlimited all you want, because they did all this for some kind of reason. Looks like my stream is having some issues right now, so I just want to, if it's choppy, I apologize. It seems like my internet connection's not quite there this evening. So the good news is, though, it shows the potential. It shows the capability that this is all possible with something from Panasonic, from Sony, from Nikon, from Olympus, from any camera manufacturer. It should be possible in a camera body this size, because that's the other thing. Oh, it's a small camera. Of course it's going to overheat. No, everything, all signs point to it does not have to be this restricted. And if anything, the doors could be wide open if these companies did a better job, specifically in this case Canon, did a better job just taking into account, put some thermal paste in there, put a heatsink in there, move a couple pieces and components around so you're not cooking the thing, which also based on the testing over at EOS HD seems like it's not even that big of a deal. But again, I'm not going to speak to that because I don't actually know. Maybe it could be dangerously hot. Who knows? We would only know if we were able to like remove the limitations and then see the camera actually cook itself, and then it's on fire smoking and you go, oh, hey, well, it's a good thing they implemented those software checks to make sure we didn't do that. Really, you're going to have a lot of people trying to break this camera, break it apart, see what workarounds there are, how to bypass the software so we can get the most out of it. It's just unfortunate that it's up to the customers to do this when it's looking pretty obvious that Canon could have done it from the beginning and made an exceptional camera. Yeah, sorry guys if the stream is awful. Really unfortunate. I don't know. Typically it's been great, but if it's a problem, just let me know. I am recording this, so I can always post it after the fact. Trevor says, two things, a larger body and a fan. You either need mass or airflow to dissipate heat. If you don't actively manage the heat, you're selling people a problem. I don't get it. Gerald said in his test that he was unable to reduce the recovery time by placing the camera in a cooler environment or blowing AC onto the camera. So for these companies touting external cooling hacks, there's a chance it's fruitless. Absolutely. There's very little you can do based on everyone's testing that will actually cool the camera down. Even people putting in like the fridge or the freezer, which I wouldn't recommend if you want to keep the camera in a good working state, but you could definitely do it for the testing. Even those situations, it doesn't seem to actually matter all that much. And then over in the article on EOS HD, Andrew talks about taking temperature checks after stopping recording. You know, he gets it, it heats up to, let's see, where's the portion where he talks about, it gets up to 62 Celsius. So he says after switching on from a cold start and being left for a couple of minutes, it's at 46 Celsius. he recorded 8K for 15 minutes and the camera temperature only increased to 62 Celsius, which is very comfortable for pretty much any kind of electronics. That's what he says. I'll take his word for it, but it gets up to 62. That's the main point. Okay, immediately after, the camera shut down and locked me out of 8K mode, but the EXIF data was reporting that the camera had cooled down almost immediately within seconds back to the mid 40s. So based on the data reported from the camera, it gets up to 62, it stops, okay, it overheated, and then it's immediately back down to the 40s. So it's cooling down, but he had to wait. He said the fact the temperatures, in fact, we started rolling before 15 minutes of 8K. If you, where does he say? Despite being back at the base temp, the timer was still locking us out of further 8K recording and even shut the camera down completely when I switched over into video mode, saying it overheated. So the temperature is 46 degrees Celsius and it's saying it's overheating, it's got to shut down, all these problems. And that's where it's kind of the smoking gun, if you will, for Canon, that this is a software restriction. This doesn't have to actually do with the temperature of the camera. You reach a breaking point based on what seems to be timers, and maybe there is some kind of internal temperature check, but it's not a constant read of that temperature to make sure that like, oh yeah, it's cooled back down, now you can record again. It seems to be based more on timers and arbitrary durations of time, really. So, Steve says, Canon cripples their cameras to not cannibalize their cinema line. Again? Oh yeah. Vlad, hard to take any conclusion based on the USHD tests and the Chinese autopsy of the camera. Of course, we're not making conclusions here. It's just, it's looking more and more, because this, to me, the USHD article and the breakdown, it's just more circumstantial evidence. We know that these cameras have an overheating problem. Basically, every reviewer talked about the overheating problem. So we know they do it. It's just a question of why and how come it's so hard to get them back into a operational mode, even if it's in your refrigerator or in a freezer. If you're filming in the Arctic, why is it so hard to cool these cameras down? And the testing that Andrew did on EOS HD, it's not to say that like, you know, it's the checks are unwarranted. Like the camera could be getting too hot. Like I said, the thermometer inside the camera where it's taking that temperature reading could be at a slightly different spot than where it's actually too hot, right? Maybe it's the CPU and the where it's measuring the temperature is a little bit off of that. So that could be really, really hot and we're just taking the temperature from a different point. So if it's fair enough to say that, yes, maybe these cameras get dangerously hot internally, maybe. But why, when it cools right back down again, are you still not able to record again if it's an actual overheating situation? No, it seems more like as if there's like an arbitrary timer that's almost like, and I hate to say it, it's almost like a pay-to-play microtransaction on like a free app on your phone where, oh, time's up. If you want to keep playing, you got to pay another $5. Otherwise, sit here and wait for 30 minutes. Sit here and wait for an hour while your, gems are mined or whatever. These kind of gambling loops from apps and video games, the free-to-play stuff where they have just littered with microtransactions. It seems like the Canon R5 has a similar situation where, and not that they're doing it, maliciously to like get money from you, like you have to pay to unlock it. That's not what I'm saying. But like that same mechanism of like a time-based thing that's restricting your ability to use the product, to use the app, to use the camera, purely based on an arbitrary timer. It doesn't make sense that if you just turn the camera on and it warms up normally, that chips away at your ability to record in the like overheating mode, which would be the high-end stuff like 8K and 4K 120, etc. It shouldn't be that just operating the camera reduces that time. Those should be special activations that then, you're overclocking the camera to the point where, okay, now you're heating it up past its point. You can only do it for 5 or 10 minutes. And really, that's all to say that the teardowns do show that there's better ways to control for, if the overheating is a problem, there's better things they could have done. And I imagine a lot of people are going to start trying to do it. If Canon actually releases this firmware where, people have got their fingers crossed, hoping that it's true, like, oh yes, Canon, please, please, please release the firmware, which I think is kind of just really disgusting that people spend their money on something and then have to put their faith in a company that didn't even release a good product to begin with, or a functional one, at least the way it's supposed to work. They put their faith in this firmware update. So maybe the firmware update comes out and maybe it does read the actual temperature on the CPU or on the sensor, wherever the heating issue's at. Well, if that happens and it's a true temperature read, well, then you are going to get people pulling these cameras apart, putting, thermal solutions in there, whether it's, third-party heat sinks, or they're putting thermal paste all in there. Like, I don't know what people are going to come up with, but in the same kind of magic lantern, same kind of traditional hack sort of way that seems to always be the case with these Canon cameras. I mean, the Mark II, the Mark III, many of these cameras, the 60D, the 70D, I don't know how many got magic lantern at some point. I know, was it the 7D never really got it, but like the Rebel camera, some of those got it. Like, Canon and hacks seem to go hand in hand, as if the machinery, the device, the hardware is capable of so much more than what they're allowing. And all of that stuff in the past was on the software side, and it was just unlocking the abilities that were kind of inherent, that were already there. The 5D Mark II, Mark III, they could do these features. It was just Magic Lantern who had to kind of unlock it. Canon didn't do it. So now you're in a situation where if the firmware gets hacked, or they actually fix it to where it's a true temperature check, now you're going to have people doing like hardware mods, which also has been a thing in the past, but probably to a lesser extent if this actually all kind of goes the way it's looking like it's going. People are going to pull these cameras apart and they're going to do aftermarket mods and say, hey, it's a modded R5, it's an extra $1,000, but now you can do unlimited recording whatever you want because we did all the thermal management that Canon didn't want to do. And it's a shame that they just didn't do it themselves in the first place. And if they keep their firmware really locked down and really restricted and it's still like timer based, then I don't know what to say. It seems like other companies are far more deserving of your hard-earned dollars, because this is all just shenanigans. Like, are they lying? Are they being deceptive? Are they just dumb? Is it miscommunication between marketing and engineering? No one knows exactly why, other than the people involved, but I call it shenanigans. I don't want to have to worry about my camera overheating. I don't want to have to do some third-party aftermarket solution to get it to work the way I want. It's like, I would rather give the money to Sony or Panasonic or somebody else who's making a good camera. Blackmagic, Zcam, Red, like maybe the Komodo. Like, I don't know. This is such a silly situation to even have to be in, because it's clear that they could have done better stuff on the hardware side to account for the overheating. And on the firmware side, they could have done a better job actually representing what's happening in the camera. Because if it's saying that it's overheating, but it's not, then the camera is lying to you. That doesn't make any sense. When I did my test with the GH5 and got it to overheat, the moment it was cool again, because I put it in the shade, it worked again. So it was a very clear and obvious, like, yep, got too hot. Okay, put it in the shade. All right, we can roll again. With the R5 and R6, it's more of this like, well, I'm doing everything I can to cool it down, but I still can't roll, which to me is completely unacceptable. Let's see. Let's see if I go back a little bit. Vlad says, I think the Canon didn't just put enough effort to fine-tune the firmware, and the main reason for that is still its philosophy regarding cannibalization of next cameras. Yeah, it could have been just a lazy firmware implementation, but the moment they make it accurate, that the door's wide open for people to start pulling the camera apart and doing whatever they can do to keep it cool. Trevor says, it also makes me concerned that if they are choosing to shut down the camera at 62 Fahrenheit, I believe it's 62 Celsius, so that would be based on USHD, so 62 Celsius to Fahrenheit, that's 143 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the temperature that my GH5 was outside in the sun in Phoenix, Arizona. It gets incredibly hot. It was probably well over that, like 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So I could understand around that area, it's like, ooh, maybe it's reading a slightly different component, and there's another component that's maybe even higher, 180, 200, who knows? Like, that could be the case. Do I think it is? I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I don't even have the camera to test myself, to put it in my own freezer, to do it all myself. But I think it's kind of obvious that whatever they're doing, it's not quite accurate. It's misleading. It's deceptive for sure. Maybe the image quality goes down the tubes above 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat does, which would be Celsius, based on Andrew's article. Heat does make the sensor noisier, and the camera only has about 11 stops of dynamic range as it is, which could be true. I mean, there is, so in the EOS HD article, he mentions that based on the API that you can get from Canon, it does give you kind of a reduced frames per second, shooting prohibited, video restricted, stills warning, live view prohibited, and degraded image quality. These are all statuses that the camera can send via the API. So it is possible that the temperature would then affect the image quality, in which case they don't want that to happen. So totally valid, totally valid. The problem becomes when it cools back down, what's the issue? Why do you have to wait another 30 minutes or an hour when it's already cooled down? Let's see. Vlad says, to be honest, as a Canon shooter fan, I'm loving this kind of pressure on the company. I think it's only fair and only valid considering how confusing this whole situation is, because it's not clear, it's not obvious. There isn't a clear understanding of why it's happening. It's people doing their best to put the pieces together, which is, at this point, all there is. If the limitation is in the firmware, no hack will prevent shutdown. The only way to do that would be to change the temp the brain thinks it's reading. You don't want to do that. You don't need a fireplace in your hands. Steve says, maybe they knew the design with 8K will eventually break. They cripple it in this way to force the video shooters to hack the firmware, and doing so void the warranty. Win-win. Oh, it's a little preemptive kind of thing. Like you force everybody to hack it apart because it's defective anyway after 6 months. Compare the R5 and the A7S III, two very different products that were developed to cater to different uses, but you're right about the marketing strategy. It was disastrous. Yeah, and I think the A7S III is for different shooters, right? 12 megapixels on the photography side is very different than 45. So it's not apples to apples. They're different, but the point is to just say whatever's happening with the R5 is very confusing, and it doesn't make sense if you just treat it and you just take Canon at faith, right? Oh, the camera is just so powerful. It's so incredible. It's doing these amazing features. Thank you, Canon. Thank you, Canon. Thank you, Canon, for the amazing features. I totally understand that it overheats. I get it. It's way too much power for my hands. Thank you for keeping, my house from burning down because your camera got too hot. Thank you so much, Canon. If you take them at face value with their saying, oh, it's overheating, that's why, it's just so much power, we can't do it, and you believe them on that, okay, fine. But the moment anyone does any testing and they go, wait, it doesn't seem quite right. This is really weird. This is kind of odd. We took it apart. Now we're testing, the software side of things. Like, all this seems like shenanigans. And I think that's the frustration. I get that there's people who love Canon and they're going to say it's the most powerful camera ever. Give it a break. And that's fine. That's fair. If the testing resulted in, yes, it gets way too hot very, very quickly, and it's just too much. Like they couldn't do it, and you pull it apart and you go, wow, it looks like they tried their best to keep the thing cool, but you're right. With this technology, we're just not there yet. We don't have the materials. We don't have the knowledge or the know-how. Valid, I get it if that's the case, but it's not. All the testing and breakdowns are kind of suspicious, at least. And even the initial reviews are also suspicious. People not really understanding, well, how come it overheated? I wasn't even doing anything. The camera was just on. Like, I can't even have it on. I have to have it off for a whole hour, and then I can maybe record for a little bit, but that's it? Seems very, very strange. Historically, has Canon ever been able to correct a flawed camera post-launch with hotfixes? They've fixed horrible AF on some models, but nothing like this. Yeah, although I can't think of anything else like this, quite like it, which is why I think so many people are talking about it, because it's so bizarre. And in the meantime, Magic Lantern is working from the shadows their way to the R5 and the R6. It's important to understand that the R5 is developed around what Canon considered essential in the product, a 45 megapixel sensor. Sure, fair enough. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, 62 Celsius. 4K video from such a high megapixel sensor is a challenge. I don't disagree with that. I do think it's odd, though, that the implementation and the way that, like, we just from the testing, it's just not, it doesn't, things don't add up. It's, I get that 45 megapixels is more than 12 and Sony has an easier job keeping their camera from overheating and doing all the stuff they're doing. But at the same time, yeah, the Canon R6 doesn't have 45 megapixel sensor or a K or even 4K 120, and it also overheats. Fair point, absolutely. Like, Vlad comes back and says, I think the R6 overheating is a much more unforgivable mistake. Yeah, R6 overheating is ridiculous. Wow, your video looks amazing. What are you shooting this on? What camera and what streaming software? Braden? Well, Braden, I'll have you know, this is the wonderful GH5. Now, it is getting a little bit older there. You know, it's not the greatest camera anymore, but it sure is a lovely camera. And yeah, it's a GH5 streaming with a little lighting setup. So thank you. I'm glad you like it. I keep playing around with it. So if it sounds weird or it looks bad in any way, just let me know and I can always try and accommodate. I did switch my microphone. If you guys have been here for other streams, I had the microphone up here before. It's now down here. I put a little condenser mic because the room tone was bothering me. And so hopefully this sounds a little bit better. Steve says, as long as I can remember, Canon's marketing has always exaggerated the capabilities a bit. They embraced the American marketing strategy. And then Luis says, no excuse on how bad they screw it up, but apparently you can record without overheating at 4K 30 with a crop, oversampled, good quality, equal to 4K HQ. Oh, interesting. Well, there's that. You can do that. I bet you can do 4K 30 without a crop, no problem on the A7S III, which again, I know it's only 12 megapixels. I get it. They're different cameras. But at the same time, if you're into it for video, like, and you're looking at the video side of things, the photo side of things is great. And I wish, honestly, I wish the Sony had more than 12 megapixels. I do wish that, which is why I find things like the S1H a little bit more compelling in that regard. 24 megapixels on the photo side, but still incredible video specs, but not quite as incredible as the 4K 120. So it's hard. It's hard. It's a balancing act. I think at some point I might do like an all cameras analysis, but that'll be another day. Steve says the 8K video samples did look quite good. Yeah, they do. There's no question. So it's just people want more of a good thing. I've stopped engaging in debate with Canon fans who keep insisting that this camera is okay. It's very clearly not okay, and the only way to use this camera reliably is to shoot it below its capacity. Yeah, and I mentioned this on the stream the other night, but I think it's good to repeat. Armando did a video basically explaining if you have an R5 and an R6, the R5 gets so crippled down to the point where the actual 4K on the R6 is better. By the time you get down to the line skipped 4K that you can record internally on the R5, you'd be better off going with the R6 because that internal 4K is much better. However, if you do that on the R6, that mode is also what overheats. So then that boils down to basically 1080p. So no matter what you choose, if the R5 gets to its breaking point and you switch, well, then that one immediately gets to its breaking point. So like you would have been better with the R5, but technically the 4K on the R6 is better. It's just kind of all shenanigans, and I don't like any of it. The quality of the standard 4K is not what people are making it up to be. A little bit of sharpening is very good quality, and nobody seems to talk about the crop 4K. It's great. Sure, I think that's totally valid. If you want 4K 30 frames or 24 or just real time, you don't want any slow motion features, you just want clean 4K, and you want a photography camera that does incredible autofocus, great stabilization, 45 megapixels, fantastic, go for it. The R5 is your camera. I bless you with that decision. However, for me, that is unacceptable. 4K 30 frames a second is in this day and age is not a feat. There are $800 cameras, I believe. Well, let me think. I have to pull it up. There's like many versions of the Z Cam that basically do whatever style 4K you want, up to 6K and 8K, I think, on one model. You got Blackmagic, who's been doing it for a while. Sony's been doing it for a while. Panasonic's been doing it for a while. There's really so many other options out there for really good 4K, 30 frame that I don't know. I suppose, yeah, the benefit is if you are a photographer and you just want good 4K 30, get the R5. But for everybody else, I think there's much better options. And it's the same crop factor of a C200, C300, or some Mini, etc. Yep, straight up best looking stream I've seen. Thank you, Braden. Appreciate it. And if you move beyond the fact that it keeps shutting down, there's the issue that it has 11 stops dynamic range in 2020. Come on, that's absurd. Make them do better, guys. Don't buy it. 11 stops dynamic range is caused by the gamma curve of C-Log. C-Log 3 will give camera one more stop, which would be 12, I suppose. And then people always argue over, you know, is it 14 stops, is it 15 stops? Well, in testing, it's really only 11 or 12 anyway, if usable. All cameras, you really have to use it in the situations that, because sometimes you don't even need that much dynamic range. That's the other component. Like, a lot of times you don't need the extra dynamic range. You might think you do, but then when you actually shoot the stuff you normally shoot, you go, oh, I actually don't. It's good to have, certainly, but and more is better, don't get me wrong, but I think arguing, you know, it's those situations of like, well, your camera's only 12.5 and mine's 13. Like, that's the point. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing with like megapixels. It's like the difference of, you know, oh, I've got, you know, 28 megapixels is nothing compared to my 42. Well, you're both posting on Instagram, so it doesn't really matter. You can do 4K 30 normal without overheating, but it's very mushy, bad. There's a video comparing both modes, sharpening applied. Yeah, so you can sharpen the 4K 30. It is line skipped, so it's not true real detail. But if the sharpening works for you and that's all you need, then that's totally fine. Vlad says it's way better than the EOS R. That could be, for sure. I saw a comparison with no stop. 4K did look quite a bit softer. I thought it might have been the drop in resolution. It is softer, but after sharpening post, very distinguishable. Okay, that's true. Okay, great. Yeah, so you can sharpen footage. Any footage you can sharpen, right? If you're filming and you have a camera that, for some reason, like is doing some kind of line skipping or pixel bending or whatever, yeah, play around with sharpening in post. Like you can sharpen it up. You can't add detail that's not there, but you can refine the detail that is there. So it is a helpful thing. I do that sometimes with the Ursa footage. I'll sharpen it a little bit just for an extra little pop, a little crispiness to it that I like. But this brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is there's a lot of different camera companies out there, but how do we know who's actually winning and losing? Who's the most popular and who's the least popular? I've talked a little bit about Canon and Sony and Panasonic, and from my perspective, why Canon keeps failing, Sony keeps winning, and Panasonic keeps losing. But how do we actually know? I don't have sales figures for any of these companies. All I have is kind of my own personal perspective on it, as well as what you see out in the wild, kind of what people are shooting with. And from my perspective, typically you see a lot of Canon, you see a lot of Sony, you see some Nikon out there for sure, more for photography. And then every once in a while you see a GH5 or some kind of Lumix camera, you know, typically doing more of the video type stuff. Every once in a while I see a Blackmagic, but really it seems to be that most people are buying Canon and Sony. And that's why I think it's kind of a shame, because Panasonic keeps making great cameras, but people don't buy them. And I have theories as to why that is that I've talked about in the past: sensor size, branding with the Lumix brand, etc. But I thought it'd be fun to go through and look and see if there's a way we can kind of evaluate, beyond my personal perspective, how popular these companies actually are. If you look at Canon's Instagram, for example, they've got 3.1 million followers. That's pretty impressive. And this isn't, you know, Canon printers. These are, you know, images, nice photographs. That's what they're posting over on Instagram. Go figure, they're putting pictures on their Instagram. There are other Canon accounts that you can find on Instagram that you can look at for Canada and the UK and whatnot. However, this isn't super scientific. We're just going through. So 3.1 million followers, that's impressive for Canon. Let's go look at Nikon and see what they have. Nikon USA, not even 1 million. That feels about right for me in terms of like brand awareness and popularity. But let's check out Sony. And Sony, granted, is another big company, but let's go to Sony Alpha, because that won't be like Blu-ray players and TVs. So 1.9 million followers. So not Canon's 3.1, but more than Nikon, almost 2 million. That's significant. Let's go see if we go look at Sony, the kind of main brand, PlayStation and whatnot, 8.5 million. So clearly we've got cameras here, we've got headphones, We've got, what is that, a speaker? We got all sorts of stuff. Let's look at Panasonic. 33,000 followers. Interesting. Well, maybe this account is not really posting much of anything. Okay, well, oh, Lumix. That's probably what it is. Let's go to Lumix, the official Instagram for Lumix. 165,000. Much, much less. So just at face value, I think this kind of proves, and granted, it's not, like I said, not a scientific test, but just in terms of popularity around these brands, Lumix has a long way to go to catch up to Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, to Canon. Let's go look at Olympus, okay, another kind of a camera brand. Micro Four Third, 48,000. Interesting. Not as popular. Let's go look at Fujifilm. Oh my goodness, they have an underscore. All right, 200,000. All right. That's respectable. Good job, Fuji. Let's see, they got some other ones too. They got Fujifilm X US, 189,000. Not up in the millions as the other brands were. Let's look at Red. Just let's branch out of, photography and look at some cinema lines. Oh, not even 500,000. Well, that makes sense. Red makes really high-end, expensive cameras. So we could keep playing around with this all day. You can even test hashtags, right? So if you search Sony Alpha, the hashtag, which is, we got 14 million posts here, almost 15 million for Sony Alpha. That's a very specific hashtag that means one thing, and there's a lot of traction around it. What if we just do hashtag Lumix? 3 million posts. So I think hopefully this helps paint the picture. I can only speak from my personal perspective, but the vibe that I get seems to be what's represented online. We could also branch out from Instagram. Maybe Instagram is just a different kind of audience. You could look at Twitter, and let's do it. So Canon on Twitter, 223,000 followers, so not nearly as good as they are on Instagram. But let's go look at Sony, and let's see what we can find here. Sony, 40,000. Okay, not anywhere near what Canon was doing. But let's see what we get for Lumix. Lumix cameras, 16,000. So on Twitter, we still have some discrepancies. Not as significant, but they're there. Another way we could test is going over to Amazon. Of course, Amazon. Let's see the reviews. How many reviews do these cameras get? That can also help kind of paint the picture. So we can look at the 5D Mark IV, very popular Canon camera, and it has 377 ratings on Amazon. How about the Sony a7S II? That was a very popular camera. And we can go over here to the 7S II, and that's 79 ratings on Amazon. Interesting. How about the very popular GH5? GH5 camera was my choice at the time between the A7S II, 191 ratings, so more than the A7S II. Again, we're not comparing apples to apples. This is just arbitrary, the people who left a review, but I think it does speak to kind of the impressions around these cameras. Specifically, if we look at the Lumix S1H. Lumix S1H has 13 reviews. 13 on Amazon. That's not a lot. Not a lot at all. Maybe we should pop over to B&H to kind of get a sense, because that's the more professional marketplace. We could also look at Adorama, I suppose, but let's go to B&H. Again, with the 5D Mark IV, we've got 1,104 reviews. Let's do the Sony A7S II. And this is a game you can play all you want. Go to whatever website you want, search around, have fun. The A7S III, of course, is the new one, but let's go to the A7S II. This has 287 reviews. And sometimes you have to be a little careful because sometimes different SKUs, different models on the site will have different review counts. Like you can see here, the Sony A7S II has 287 reviews, but then the A7S II body only, 287. Where's the one? A7S II with the 2470, 270. So these review counts are different. I don't know if that's in the back end of B&H where they're they're aggregating them, but like the people who didn't get the lens, I don't know how they do their reviews. But in any case, I think it's still interesting to look at. We've also got the Lumix GH5, which we'll take a look at here, and 191 reviews, which is interesting that that's kind of what we had on Amazon, if I recall, that same number, 191. Odd, but interesting. And you can see these two different ones, GH5, GH5. Of course, there was the GH5S, can't forget that one. So slight variation, but even then, that drops you down to 60 reviews. So we went from 191 down to 60, which feels about right for how popular that camera was after the fact. I think there were a lot of people who got the GH5 and then didn't, feel the need to upgrade to the 5S. You can do the same thing on Amazon. If we look at the GH5 and we say, okay, the GH5 has 191. It was 191. That's interesting. And then we look at the GH5S. Now we're looking at 30 reviews here. See, this one has 1, but it's just because it's a different kit. So again, not scientific. I know this is not like, oh, it's proof, it's evidence, case closed. No, it's just kind of the vibe around these brands and what people are buying. And I don't think it should come as any surprise that not a lot of people bought the S1 comparatively to, how many people are going to buy the A7S III, or who bought maybe the other good one to look at. I know what I want to look at. So the S1, 24 reviews on Amazon. Not a whole lot. Let's just look at the A7 III. Very popular camera, A7 III. 527 reviews. So when we're looking at this and we're kind of trying to evaluate, okay, Sony's very, very popular compared to some of this other stuff. Now let's look at Canon and just the R, because that would have been kind of a, similar thing. Canon going mirrorless. What do we got there? 200 reviews. And then there's the RP, which is also, what's that, 100 reviews here, 18. Again, Amazon's not the greatest at some of this stuff, so you can always compare over on B&H as well. 464 for the Canon R, 464. And then the R5 has some reviews. 5 stars on the R5, apparently, says everyone on B&H do they have it? Let's see. Released in limited quantity. Well, 29 people love the R5. That's interesting. All right, so we have 464 reviews on the EOS R. Let's look at the A7 III. Not the S, because I know the S is 766. Which again feels about right in terms of popularity for these things, just based on who's using them on Instagram, on YouTube. I mean, your favorite creators, whoever you follow, like they're shooting with something, so usually talk about it. The other thing you can do is we can go over to, let's go to Google and let's just look up Canon 5D Mark IV. Great thing about Google has this nice little reviews metric here, which I believe they're aggregating from somewhere, but you get this very, very high number on the 5D Mark IV, 3,119 reviews. Let's do the same thing for the Lumix GH5, 1,386. Interesting. Let's do the Sony A7 III, 2,573. And then finally, Lumix S1. Just to kind of get a sense. And that one didn't even pop up with a sidebar. There, the S1H, 53 reviews. So you can kind of get a sense. Someone asked me in a previous video, they left a comment saying, well, like, that's just your opinion. Like, you don't know that these cameras are doing great. They're selling like hotcakes. Panasonic's making a fortune on all these cameras. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know their sales figures, but it seems like they have a lot of ground to catch up in the marketplace, just in terms of the volume around these products, the literal volume of like people talking about it and making noise and saying, what's your favorite camera, or what do you shoot with, or what should I get? Because that's typically what people ask, right? That's the vast majority of consumers. Is not me. I'm a very small part of the market. Most people who are buying cameras are just people who want to take pictures for like their family, their friends, or whatever, and they're, hey, which is the best one? What should I get? And now with Instagram, you have a lot of people who want that higher end look and feel because they want their page to look really nice. They don't want to just be like, shots on their iPhone. They want something that's professional looking. Typically means shallow depth of field, and then they'll throw, some basic color on there, like a preset or something. But there's other people who, go all out and they do all the mobile Lightroom type stuff. In any case, Sony has won a lot of attention and favor over the past 10 years or so that they've been doing mirrorless. I mean, they went mirrorless full frame well ahead of everybody else. Panasonic is just now catching up. Canon is just now catching up. I should have talked about Nikon, but who talks about Nikon? I don't know. I'm sure there's people who love Nikon. Don't get me wrong. No offense if you like Nikon. But it's just interesting to see. I think it's fair to evaluate that these brands are at different positions, and rightfully so. Who do they cater to? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? And then maybe talking about it in a why it is the case that Sony has done such a great job, Canon has done a decent job, and Panasonic has done less than stellar with awareness. And this isn't me hating on Panasonic. I love the Lumix cameras. You're watching a GH5 right now. It's a great camera. I had the GH4 before it. I can go all the way back to the GH1. Maybe I'll pull it out here one day for a video or something. But yeah, I've been a fan of the Lumix cameras for a long time. But the question becomes, why isn't it more mainstream? Why don't more people use these cameras? And I think it comes down to some underlying core factors. The Lumix cameras have great features. When you look at, the first to do, I don't say the first, but like one of the first mainstream cameras to do 4K in an affordable compact camera, the GH4. And then the GH5 to do 4K 60. And having things, well, the GH5, like internal stabilization with video, having the Vlog upgrade, being able to do things just like setting shutter angle and all the video features. You can do anamorphic. They opened up 6K. Like they've added so many features that are video centric to the GH line. And then they've done the other things like, face detection, autofocus, and that kind of mirrorless style technology. And their feature set has been great. As a video person, I love the Lumix GH cameras. And having recently tested the S1H, love that camera as well. Beautiful, wonderful. But what I think Sony has gotten right, and even Canon has kind of missed for a long time, is just the core underlying features. When you look at Sony Alpha 7, 7S, 7R, whatever 7 it is, or that 9 is also out there, right? I don't think there's an Alpha 5. I'm not aware of all the Sony cameras. I apologize. But at least with the 7 series, those cameras, core underlying features, full frame, mirrorless. That alone has separated Sony so far ahead of everybody else, regardless of the codec being 8-bit, or it's only 420, or they don't do high frame rate. All the stuff they're fixing now, or the flip screen, or the small batteries, or all the kind of specs, the details, the feature set, the core underlying technology is full frame mirrorless. And that has gotten them so far ahead of everybody else, because Canon wasn't doing it for the longest time. Panasonic was doing mirrorless, but they drugged their feet on going full frame. So when people ask what's the best camera to use, and people say, oh, you need full frame, which is arguable. There's people who don't need full frame. They like the small compact size. Should more people, regular people be shooting micro four third? Probably. Do they need the big old expensive $2,000 lens, or would they be fine with the $500 lens? That's not how people think, though. They go with the kind of core underlying set, and then everything on top is a pro or con to help them weigh their decision. And with the Lumix cameras, for the longest time, it was like, they're great, they're fantastic for video. And anyone who didn't want them, it was always because, well, it's not full frame though. People, oh, but a speed booster. Yeah, but it's not full frame. I'm going to go Sony because it's full frame. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't care what your camera does. It could do anamorphic 12K, and I'm still going with the full frame camera because I like full frame. And I'm going with Sony because it's mirrorless. And Canon still has, the mirror box in their DSLR. So like Canon's, I'm writing them off too. I'm going to go Sony. It's the kind of core underlying stuff. So I'm glad that the market has moved to a point where everybody has embraced full frame mirrorless for the most part. The big players anyway, the people who are making great cameras. And we see that now with the A7S III, the Canon R5, the R6, the S1H, and the S1 series from Panasonic. And Nikon has cameras out there too, but again, who talks about Nikon? At least I don't. So I think when you look at all this stuff, I may only have my single perspective on what resonates with me, what I think is popular, how I read it. But I think there's also some signals out there that speak pretty highly to what the general vibe is to out there with other people. Not scientific, I know, but I think it's just interesting to look at and compare. Well, where do all these things line up? And then you can draw your own conclusions from there. I'm going to pop back over into the chat. Yeah, I just wanted to do that one because someone had made that comment on a video saying like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, well, I don't actually know, but it certainly seems like this is the case. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe Panasonic is winning. I don't know. They're winning for me personally, but again, most people, I run into that I talk to that are out there that you see, they're like, oh yeah, the GH5, yeah, that's a cool camera, but no, I went with Sony, it's full frame. I go, oh yeah, like that's almost why I went Sony too. But the video features are better on the GH5. I don't know. It's just like whatever you need. It doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong. Let's see. I'm here in the chat. Panasonic Lumix series, the only camera line with a middle name. Well, Canon EOS. I don't know what the EOS is about. If we want to talk about middle names and ranting, I think I've talked about EOS before, but I don't know what it even means. I've looked it up at one point. Electronic optical system. Canon. There's a Wikipedia somewhere. I've read it before. Electro-optical system. Ooh, I was pretty close. The Canon EOS, or EOS, the electro-optical system, which is that, do we even need it on the cameras anymore? Because this was the thing that I think I posted a picture on, I posted a picture on YouTube, which is not, you should be posting videos on YouTube. No, I posted a picture. Gerald and Dunn he did a video. I can pull it up here quickly as well, but we'll just look at Canon. Okay, so Canon, they always brand the top of the camera with the word Canon, and then EOS is off to the side. Sony, I'll have to pick a camera. The A7 III. Let's look at that. A7 III, top of the camera, it says Sony, and then off to the side, it's got the, the Alpha little logo, which, yeah, technically it's not even the A7, it's the Alpha 7. So it's really just the 7 III, because Alpha would be its middle name. Alpha is the EOS equivalent, right? In this situation, they just shortened it to A7. Sounds a little bit cooler, probably. Alpha 7. I don't know. That's neat, too. Anyway, Lumix S1H, right? I call it like Panasonic. Like, look, Panasonic comes up. When you search for Lumix S1H, it says Panasonic, and then it says Panasonic Lumix, but it doesn't say Panasonic anywhere on this thing. It says Lumix right at the top middle, and then it says S1H off to the side. This is why it matters. So Gerald, over on Gerald and Dunn, who everyone knows and loves because he makes fantastic videos, very detailed. Let's go, was it S1H? He Panasonic S1 versus S. It's not a Panasonic, Gerald. It's a Lumix. I don't know what you're selling over here. Oh, he puts Lumix in the description. All right. But he calls it a Panasonic. Everybody calls it a Panasonic. Panasonic S1H. Panasonic S1. Let's just search S1H. Even if you search Lumix, do the Lumix ones come up first? No, Panasonic. Panasonic. Pros with a Lumix. All right, Panasonic. 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 It doesn't say Panasonic on the camera. How would any regular person know it's a Panasonic? It's a Lumix, is what it says on the camera, but everyone says Panasonic because that's what we all care about. And yet they continue to put Lumix on these things, talking about Lumix. Lumix doesn't even have a website. We did this the other night on a different stream. You Google Lumix, there's no website for Lumix. It takes you to the Panasonic website. I get worked up, but like I don't care that much. I just think it's kind of silly and kind of funny. So anyway, I've done that rant already. I still believe it. It still hurts me every day. Canon EOS, Sony Alpha. Yes, Vlad. And then Trevor, also chasing market share isn't free. It takes a lot of money, a lot of R&D, a lot of marketing. A company may only chase as much market share as they can financially support. Canon is financially a massive company. Yes, yes, yes. That's like a series designation. But yeah, isn't Lumix also a series? Honest question here, at least in the camera segment. Yes, Canon, Sony, Panasonic are larger companies than Nikon or Fuji and so on. EOS is a Greek goddess, I think. I read somewhere about the Greek thing. I wish the S1 had better autofocus. In video, ASMR Town, the autofocus, it depends. Better. Is it awful? No, I just tested it. The autofocus works great in photo mode, and it works decent in video mode. So it's not as good as Sony and Canon, but it does work. It's not terrible. I can tell you that much. I'm sure I missed some things in here. You guys were having fun in the chat, which is great. Sigma. Oh, the Sigma FP. Yes, the Sigma FP. Sigma is another brand we could look at and see, go look at Sigma's Instagram. Because I like the Sigma lenses. They've been doing an awesome job putting out some good stuff. And then Sigma Photo. Yeah, $250,000. Yeah, they're doing great. Good job, Sigma. The FP. Now we need the FP2. What is with the terrible names? They really are just like catalog numbers and letters. I don't understand. Why don't they give them good names? Call it something. Samsung did like the NX1. What does that mean? How would anyone remember that? Even you start talking about like, this is why it's impossible to keep track of any of this stuff, because they all have strange names. There's the Canon M50, and then there's an I think there's an M100, and there's an M5. What's the difference between them? How would anyone know? Well, if it's one letter, that means something. That means it's good. Or if it's one number, like M5, it's one number, so that's good. If it's two numbers, 50, that's like middle. And then if it's 3 numbers, then that's the low end. How would anyone know that? That's what Nikon does, what Canon does, what all these companies do. It just makes zero sense. I think in general, less products, focus on less, okay? Make a few good things. Apple has, anytime Apple goes off the rails, it's always because they're doing too much, they're making too many products, too many SKUs, too many colors, too many sizes. We don't need a giant phone, a kind of giant phone, a regular phone, a medium phone, and then a small phone. Like, I don't know why everyone has the Goldilocks syndrome of having to make different sizes and different, like, make a good product that does what it's supposed to do, and then have a few alternates that are vastly different for vastly different audiences. Like, there was no one had an issue with the GH1, the GH2, the GH3, the GH4, or the GH5. And yet Panasonic thought, we can make a GH5S because that's what everyone else is doing. So we have to, segment our GH5 line. So now with the GH6, they're talking about, well, there might be, a GH6R and a GH6X and a GH6V. What do these things mean? How would anyone know what these things are? It is the Apple thing. They do it there, the iPhone 11 and the 11 Pro and the 11S and the 11S Pro. And at the end of the day, you just overwhelm people. And maybe you make more money short term, but I think you have products that just don't sell at all if you have too many, especially with the Micro Four Thirds stuff, when there's like, I get that some, like if you have the full frame line and then you have APS-C, that makes sense. But when there's like hundreds of Micro Four Third cameras and like, they're not bigger sensors or smaller sensors, they're just like, why is a GH5 and a G9 equivalent? Oh, well, the G9 is like a little GH5. How would anyone know that? That's not obvious. You have to explain it, and then someone goes, really? Oh, I don't want to deal with that. That's annoying. And then someone says, oh, how about the Sony Alpha 7 III? That's the good one. Or the 7R4, but they still only have the A7S II. Oh, wait, but the A7S III, that's coming. And it's like, but don't they have an A7R4? Don't they have the fourth of one of these? Oh, yeah, but that's the R. That's the big megapixel one. Well, what's the S? Oh, that's for the low megapixel one for low light. Okay, well, what's the regular one? Well, that's just like the in-between. it's kind of silly. Like I know each one of them caters to a certain type of person. So each individual person is going to say, oh, well, this is the one I like for these reasons. But in general, a lot of the things are kind of, there's a lot of gray haze in between all of these things. And then people go, yeah, but which one's the good one? That's ultimately what you want to know. Which one's the good one? Do I want the Lumix S1, the S1R, or the S1H? Which is the good one? I don't know. Just focus on making one really good product and maybe having one slight alternate version of it. Let's see. Hello, Sammy. I think it's Sammy. I know Sigma is entering the cams. Yes, the FP is a nice entry. We'll hopefully see more there. They should name cameras after cars from the 70s. They should. That would be better because people know what a Camaro is. If I say Corvette, you immediately, you know what a Corvette is. If I say Mustang, you know what that is. If I say, you know, I don't know, Suburban, you know what that is. I don't have to, you know, because it has a name, it has an identity. If I had to, if everything was just numbers and letters, you'd be like, wait, which one was that again? Was that the big one or the little one? Was it the red one or the yellow? I don't remember. It's like, no, give it a name, give it an identity. And then people are more attached to it too. Dude, the lenses are way worse. The lenses, the Nikon 70 to 28 or 28 to 70, 2.8 EDIF VR2. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. They need to standardize. Like the vibration reduction that Nikon does, like VR, it's not a VR lens. It has nothing to do with VR. You can call it vibration reduction all you want. It's not VR, okay? VR is virtual reality. That's been taken. I know VR probably came first, right? These have been around for a long time, but standardize. Is it IS, image stabilization? Okay, let's go with that. Let's go with that. Like the IBIS, everybody understands. But yeah, they do make a ton of difference, 70 to 200s. Imagine just getting into photography and trying to figure out which lens to buy. It's impossible. It is impossible. I think the entry-level shooter is the main demographic these companies make their money from. Yeah, and if they're making it off of them not knowing and confusing them, it doesn't surprise me that more people don't like stick with it or get into it. It's obtuse in a way that it shouldn't be. Even, you know, the Zcam E2 F6, Zcam E2 S6, Zcam E2 F8. And you're like, what? Why are there so many of these? What is... And when you understand, oh, it's the last little thing, F is full frame, S is super 35, and then the number is the maximum resolution, it sort of makes sense, but then why is it all the E2? Why isn't it just the Zcam like S6 or F6 or give it like, you know, Red, I think, did a really good job for a while. They went off the deep end too with their kind of crazy naming, but at the beginning it was the Red 1, and that was it. And everyone knew, oh, you got to have a Red 1. It's the best thing ever. And it had the Mysterium X sensor, or it had the Mysterium sensor. And then they later came out with the Mysterium X sensor. And then they also put the Mysterium X in the Epic. And then there was the Epic X, I think was the Mysterium X. I don't know, it gets a little confusing there because there's Mysterium and then Mysterium X were the sensors. And then there was the bodies, like the Red 1 body, and then the Epic X, and then the Scarlet. But then from there, then they started doing like, well, it's the Dragon, and the Weapon, and the Gemini, and the Hydrogen, and now there's the Komodo, and there's the Ranger, and the Raven, and it's nice that these all have names. The problem with Red is that they did a weird naming with, is it the sensor we're talking about, or is it the body? And that got really confusing as to what was what. And they would always change the body 1 year, and then they would come with a new sensor, and so you could like upgrade it. I never did any of this stuff. It was just following it from the outside, trying to figure out what in the world, like which one's the one you want? Which is the good one? Oh, so there's a Dragon. Okay, so it's the so there's the Epic, and then that's the body, and then the Dragon body, which sensor's in there? And you're gonna go, oh, that's the, and I don't even know. I'm sure there's a chart out there somewhere. We could look all this stuff up and see how many different SKUs there are. But there's something to that, the Red, you know, if I say Scarlet or Epic or Dragon or any of these things, like, if you've heard of them, it should like resonate with you. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was that camera. Oh yeah, yeah. There were some SKUs in there or whatnot that kind of made it a little confusing, but it's just the same problem with like laptops and stuff. Like all these products, these electronics, they never give them like good names. They make so many, and it's just, more numbers and letters. And how are you supposed to know what? Just make the one that's the Ford Mustang, and then you could do like packages on it. Like I get that if you want a camera, and then you could get upgraded with different packages. Like, oh, we made the Mustang, but do you want it? You know, and they get off the rails too, because they do like the Cobra or the, what do they do? The GT. I don't know, all the crazy stuff they do. There's just so many options sometimes. When I first got into photography, I bought a bunch of lenses I never ended up using. Yeah, something. Intel processor names are really bad too. Canon owns IS, so Nikon had to say vibration reduction. Yeah, well, that's the thing is like they all have a little bit different. Like there's OS, optical stabilization. That's the Lumix or Panasonic one. And then what does Sony call it? Does Sony call it? What are their vibration reduction components over at Sony? Sony lens with IS. Oh, it's OSS. That's, yeah, OS. It's just, and then why are they G? What is the G? This is okay. Sony has the G Master lenses. Okay. And then Panasonic now has the S lenses. And then Sigma does the art, the sport, and the contemporary. This one drives me really nuts. If you search L mount lens, you'll get some Panasonic stuff. But if you search specifically for like an 85, let's say, I think you get Canon popping up. Yeah, look, you get Canon popping up because Canon L lenses have been a thing for so long. Like, oh, it's an L lens from Canon. That like, even if you search L mount, you get Canon stuff that pops up, and you're like, this isn't what I wanted. Now, granted, this could be an issue with Amazon search, but it's the frustrating thing that Panasonic keeps running into. And I guess it technically comes from Leica, so I understand that it's the L mount, but there's already L lenses that has nothing to do with the mount, so they're messed up there. And then Panasonic, their log mode, they went with V-Log. I guess it's probably better than P-Log. But why, like L-Log? They could have done that for Lumix. Why is it V? Oh, for Varicam? Okay, well, you have to know that that exists. But even then, V-Log is vlog, which by the time they came out with V-Log, like vlogging was already a thing. So then people type, V-Log, and it's like, are you saying vlog or V-Log? What are you talking about? They keep running into these problems where there's so much confusion around what they're doing that it makes it hard for anyone who doesn't know to understand, which I find just, again, kind of humorous. I like their cameras. I like everything they do. It's just kind of silly. Which brand named Ibis? I don't know. Red Camera's naming scheme was ridiculous. Panasonic Blackbird, that would work. Panasonic Civic. The community started calling it Ibis. In-body image stabilization. Canon Fiesta. Canon Interceptor. I thought the G was for gangsta. Yeah. I don't know the logic behind all these things. I'm sure it's like it makes sense at some point, and then they just keep doing it long term. The Sony Alpha, like what, do we still need that? I know it's different than what it used to be. Was it the NEX? So were those Alpha cameras? Or is Alpha just the full frame? No, it's got the Alpha on there. I don't even know what that means then. Why is there an Alpha on here? Is that just their photo line? It doesn't say it in the name of the thing. It's just the NEX. I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking half the time. Yeah. G. I don't know. G lenses. Why, Sony? Why? What does it mean? Is it just arbitrary? It is. You just wanted to put a G on there, which I think looks kind of silly. Anyway, last thing I wanted to talk about. It's very easy to become bored. I think we all find ourselves there at certain points in time, and a lot of us don't know like why it is. Like, why are we bored? There's more and more to do each and every day with phones and screens and entertainment nonstop. It's way easier now to keep yourself entertained than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And even then, as a kid, I remember being bored all the time, seemingly. Like, I was always just bored, and I'm bored, and I'm bored. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And oftentimes there doesn't seem to be a cure for it. It's just like this feeling you have of just being bored, like nothing is entertaining. You don't want to do anything. You don't feel like anything. You're not hungry. You're not tired. You don't want to watch TV. You don't want to scroll on Instagram. You don't want to do anything. You're just like, I'm bored. I find the cure for boredom being in creation. And it's one of the hardest things to do when you're bored is go to create something. Because usually when you're bored, there's also usually like kind of a laziness that comes with it where you're just like, I don't feel like doing anything. But almost all the time when I find myself in that state where I'm feeling bored and nothing is really satisfying or keeping me entertained, it's a good signal that I haven't created anything in a while. And this isn't to say that you have to be nonstop creating and you always have to do it all the time. But if I catch myself in those patterns of boredom, I realize I haven't been doing enough. I haven't been producing enough. I haven't been creative in a way of like making something or building something or taking a photo and editing it and producing, making something new. It doesn't have to be a photo. It could be a video. It could be specifically shooting video, editing video, making music, making a song, doing something, a new project around the house. Maybe you want to remodel something or build something new or get into gardening and grow a garden. There's plenty of different things you can do, but I think it's always about the creation, making something. And it's really hard to do though, because you get in that point where you just don't feel like it. And I myself get there often of I just don't feel like doing it. It's just, I don't want to. And that's the hardest thing to do is things you don't want to do, because the things you want to do, you just end up doing. It's very easy to watch TV shows or movies if you want to do it, because you just do it. It's not hard. You don't have to try at all. Creating things, being productive can be a challenge often, because it's usually the most valuable thing to do when you're in the mood that doesn't want to do it at all. And typically what I do is I just force myself through it. I just grit my teeth and I do it because I know it's like the right medicine for the situation. Sometimes you have to, with like diet and fitness and nutrition and these things, like doing the right thing isn't usually the fun, easy thing. Sitting and watching TV shows isn't hard. It's very easy. Making something, producing something is a challenge. It's a burden, but it makes you stronger. It makes you better. It gets you out of those ruts of boredom and you start feeling better. And it typically is one of those things where once you start doing it, it's easier to keep doing it and it feels good. And it's almost energizing, and you can just stay with that momentum and keep going. And it's when you stop that it's easy to fall back into the pattern of, well, I'll get to it later. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. And that's the thing. Forcing yourself to do it is typically all it takes to get started, which is the hardest part to do. But if you can just overcome that initial mental block and just force yourself, like will yourself, the hardest I don't want to do this. I want to take a nap. I want to whatever you think is going to cure your boredom. It's not it. Create something, do something, be productive, make something. It will solve it. And the best thing is once you start doing it, you'll want to do more of it, because then you'll crave that feeling and that satisfaction. And then all the things that were entertaining before were really just a distraction. Most of those things that keep you occupied don't actually fix boredom. If you're sitting in traffic listening to a podcast, you're still kind of in a state of being bored. You're just distracted from it because you're listening to someone else talk about something, and it's helpful because you can just kind of tune out. Or if you're in, the waiting room at like a doctor's office or something, and you're just scrolling on your phone, you're still bored, but you're distracted from it. You're not consciously aware of it the same way you would be if you're just sitting there all by yourself, staring at a blank wall. That's when the boredom hits you right in the face. But, the podcast, the shows, the scrolling on social media, the constant, texting and whatnot, typically is just a distraction from the state of boredom. It takes being productive to actually get you out of it. And then those other things feel kind of like not so important. You don't need to do it. It's okay if you miss an episode of your show, or you miss, an episode of the podcast, or you don't check Instagram for the day. If you're creating and doing something and making something, you don't need to. Where before what felt really important isn't anymore. Same thing is true with video games. It's you're consuming it, you're taking it in as entertainment. It's distracting you from the boredom, but it's not actually fixing it. It's not making you entertained. There's plenty of times where I've played video games, 8 hours straight, and by the end of it, it's like, I'm so freaking bored. Like, this video game is boring. Like, everything's just awful, miserable. Like, you feel sick almost because you've just been consuming this like distraction rather than building, making, creating, doing something productive. And that's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes you just literally can't because you're sitting in traffic or you're in a doctor's office or you just don't have time, and so you're just going to play a video game. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But just be aware that when you find yourself in those states of boredom, it's probably because of the things you're doing, the habits you've created, the activities you're participating in, and there's an easy fix. Just go create something. Back in the chat. All right, let's see. Where are we picking up? Here straight from Google. Lumix is Panasonic's brand of digital cameras, ranging from pocket, point-and-shoot models to digital SLRs. Yeah, so Alpha and Lumix are designating that their entry to prosumer lines, or maybe just photo as well. Vlad says that's great advice. Yeah, it's just something it's a lot of the stuff I talk about is just from like my own personal experience of like motivation for me, or things that come up of like, yeah, like why am I so bored? Oh, wow. Creating something, doing something, fix that. It's obvious, but also it's helpful to have those reminders. Just me personally, myself, I like talking about it as a good reminder. You talk about this stuff, you validate it, and then it kind of sinks in a little bit deeper, I think, and then you can, apply it more frequently in real life and don't get caught up in all the distractions of social media and entertainment. Pana drops Lumix for all their pure video cameras, such as their DVX line. Yeah, yep. So yeah, I guess if you want, yeah. But at that point, it's like, but then what is Lumix? If it's just a Panasonic, call it a Panasonic. But I've already made that video. Sammy says, great advice. I was about to ask where you get so much energy to cast so much. Great show. Keep it up. Well, thank you. Where do I get the energy to cast so much? Right before this, no joke, I was like, I don't want to stream tonight. It's so much work. And it's not. It's all the mental tricks that your brain plays on you to like get you to like go to sleep or something. I don't know why, but just the nature of like just forcing yourself to do it. And now it's like, it's so fun doing it, but it's the act of doing it. That's the hard part. It's like, I got to go to the gym. I don't want to go to the gym. Not today. I'll skip today. And then tomorrow comes around. You're like, I'll skip today too. And then the next comes around, I'll skip this week. And then months go by because you keep making the same excuse every single day, and it just adds up into becoming a habit, a pattern. And the same thing is true with like productivity and creating. Like you just have to start doing it, so then it becomes the pattern, it becomes the habit. And then it's very easy. It's very energizing if you just keep doing it. Wikipedia has a good way to understand the different lines of Panasonic Lumix cameras. DMC-G is standard mirrorless line. DMC-GF is distinguished from the DMC-G line by the lack of an integrated electronic viewfinder. GH marketed as their higher-end mirrorless line. GM is marketed as the smallest interchangeable lens camera. GX is the enthusiast camera with capabilities between the GF line and the standard G line. I mean, yeah, if you have to read Wikipedia to understand this stuff, I mean, it's good that it's there. It is the reasoning. So thank you, Budget Video, for pulling that in. But see you, Vlad. Vlad says, good night. Brazil is politically melting and COVID infested. It's hard not to get depressed and demotivated. I am sorry that you're going through that, Vlad. Try and not allow the exterior world as much weight as it applies constantly. Try to stay focused on the things that you have personal control over, that you can do as an individual, because there's a lot of stuff that's out of your control, a lot of stuff that's out of my control, there's a lot of stuff that's out of our control. It is what it is, and it's a terrible saying, but I tend to like to focus on the things that I can do myself that aren't as reliant on other people, other factors, other events. Find those things that'll hopefully bring you a little joy and keep you from being depressed and demotivated. Get out and shoot when you don't want to, and you can create things that will surprise you. Absolutely. Vlad says, my last really happy moment was in 2017 hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in your country. America is awesome. It's such a beautiful country. Thank you, Vlad. Yeah, America is pretty great just because there's so much variety here. I mean, it's relatively big. I know it's not the biggest country, but so much variety and so many cool things to see and places to go. But I've never been to Brazil, but I imagine it's also got its kind of special spots. Hope to get back to US next year. Absolutely. And then watching your videos has been awesome. You're a cool dude. Thank you, Vlad. You're a cool dude, and thank you for being in the chat and tuning in. Sorry it's so late for you that I do these. It's late for me too, but not quite as late. Lincoln says, will Panasonic lower the price of the S1H? I sure hope so. I think it'd be smart if they did. The S1H would sell a lot better if it was cheaper. I think when it came out, it was it was a hard pill to swallow. $4,000. You go, ugh, that's a little expensive, don't you think? For your first one? And they go, well, the S1 is, the cheaper one. And the S1H has all these great video features. And you're like, yeah, but it's kind of the same. What's really all that different about it? There are definitely some video features, but it's like to justify the price difference. If the S1H was down like 3,000 or below, like if it was 2,800, like instant buy. But instead, people go Blackmagic, or they'll go Zcam, or they'll go Sony. There's just so many options out there. It really has to be competitive. And the features on the S1H are fantastic. It's just the price, though. That's where the sticking point. Steve says, with Canon replacing the combustion engine, Panasonic may not have to lower the price of the S1H. I think they still should anyway. It's too soon for an S2. Probably, right? If they came out with an S2, that might be a little quick for the people who bought the S1. Maybe they care, maybe they don't care. Could they make something that would be a meaningful upgrade that quickly as well? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But it seems a little early for an S2. There definitely needs to be a GH6 soon, and there should be. It's time for it. Like, we're in the history of GH cameras. Now is the time for the GH6. We're kind of past it a little bit. So GH6, and then come back with the S2. But in the meantime, drop the price on the S1H, get more people into L-mount, because I would love to buy the S1H, but not when it's $4,000 for something that the Sony a7S III, which those would be kind of the equivalents to look at, is $500 cheaper, and it's doing things like 4K, 120, and Sony has fixed all the criticisms from the past. It's still not like a proper video camera in the same way the S1H is definitely more of that like filmmaker video cinema camera. The a7S III is kind of, I don't know, just more like a pure hybrid of, it's a photography camera too. The S1H is as well, but hopefully you understand what I'm trying to communicate in that the a7S III doesn't do anything from a filmmaking standpoint other than unlocking more, codecs, resolutions, frame rates. But the fact that there's no shutter angle is a big highlight to me of like, well, it's not for video people if there's no shutter angle, because at this point these hybrid cameras have had shutter angle, and it was like reintroducing it to people, right? People who came from the old, like the DVX 100, let's say, had shutter angle, and it's like, oh, shutter angle, okay, it's like a film camera, okay, that makes sense. And then everything swung to DSLRs and that style of shooting with these kind of photography cameras that only did shutter speed. And then so it was like, well, then I think it was with definitely the GH4, you could do shutter angle, and it was this like, oh, this is important, and then teaching people, no, yeah, you're shooting with a shutter speed a certain way based on shutter angle. And having that conversation, educating people through that, it's like, wait, what? I'm so confused, because they're coming from like photography or having a photo camera. It doesn't make sense. So now that we're at a point where these things are more ubiquitous and we've had shutter angle for a while at the Lumix cameras, it's like, I don't understand why Sony wouldn't just do it. But the new Canon R Cinema line seems interesting if it's real. Yeah, for sure. I think it'll be overpriced for what it is, probably, but we'll see. Blackmagic and Zcam look great. Zcam even has budget options as well. Yeah, it's the E2C, I think. There's a few Zcam like cheap options that are out there that are really cool. But that is plenty for tonight to talk about. Thank you all for hanging out. Unless there's any final stuff in the chat, I appreciate it. I enjoy these streams. They cure me of my boredom, that's for sure. Sometimes it's just like, you know, there isn't anything to create because it's late at night, and so this is a form of creation, I suppose, in some sense. And we can hang out, talk about cameras, talk about filmmaking and video. Eventually, there'll be a point where, you know, I'll be able to show a little bit more of that. I haven't done a whole lot recently that will be worth highlighting or that I could show. But eventually that's my plan, to kind of be reviewing footage, talking about some projects that I have going on, to be a little bit more hands-on in the live stream, if that makes sense. So it's not just a bunch of talking. We can actually look and review stuff. Hopefully you get a sense of that with what I was trying to do with the S1H footage and photos and impressions. Like, not quite perfect. It's kind of tough in certain circumstances with the live stream, but hopefully it'll be more of that, you know, as I keep working on stuff and playing stuff out. But yeah, thanks again, everyone. It's been good, and I'll talk to you all again soon.